you again. I'm afraid to actually boot up this lab right now because I have Airflow running. But let me show you kind of what I did and how to read through this. So remember, there's essentially three services, okay, that we're going to be using. So it's the front end, which will be the Streamlit app, right? The back end, which will be our Flask app, and then the database, right, which is Postgres. Okay. So for the front end, let's try to understand what's going on here, right? So the build, right? This is the specifying where the Docker file is going to be located. So here it says the context is front end, and we're mapping the port. So this is the containers port, mapping it, to external services at port 8501, and then the depends on API means basically like doing boot up Streamlit until the API service is booted up. This part right here, even though it says volumes, this is bind mounting, right? This means that basically anything in the source folder, I suppose, like in the container, we want to be able to reference that in the source folder here. So what is the point of this? The point is so that if I decide to change any of this code, right, I want this to be live updated in the container, right? So it's going to be easier for me to debug and things like that, and just to make live updates and see how it affects my app. Let's look a little bit more, right? So we're in this front end service, right, where we bind mount. This is inside the container. This is on my laptop, right? So this is like the source code base on my laptop. And then here's the build context. And so inside front end, there should be a Docker file. Here it's actually pretty straightforward, I think. I changed the working directory, right? So this, and then the rest is then copy the requirements.txt into the current directory, install it, then copy over the rest of the code base, and then do Streamlit run source index.py. Why do I do it in these two steps? It's to take advantage of caching, right? Remember, like everything's as in terms of a layer. So if I update the code base, like if I update this index.py file between builds, but I don't update the requirements, then I don't have to reinstall the requirements every time, right? As long as this file isn't changed, then it's not going to reinstall. It will just start right here. Okay, so it'll just copy over the rest of my changes. And then Streamlit run, blah, blah. So when it's building the image, right, it will just look at changes to each layer and kind of see, okay, we have changes to the code base and start here. All right, and then when we have the, when we're running the container, right, notice that we will get those updates as well because of this part right here. So you'll kind of get live updates to the container, but once you shut down the container, right, any live updates won't be persisted, so you have to rebuild the image, and that's when this Docker file will be run. Okay, the expose 8501, it actually doesn't really do anything. It's more for like kind of telling you that this is the port that it's going to be run on, but really the exposing of the port is happening over here, right? Where we're making 8501 accessible. All right. The next thing, right, is this API. So again, the build context is the API folder. We're mapping the port. I think for me, like 3000 was not the best port. This is the port on your laptop, right? So you could switch this to a different one, like 3001. And then this is inside the container. It's port 5000. And then you can see this depends on my database, saying that actually, like, we wanted to say that the service is healthy. Okay. And then the same thing is going on here, right? I'm bind mounting so that if I make live updates to this restaurants folder, anything in here, that it will, map it to my container and just directly pick them up. Okay. The key thing, right, kind of like the way these things connect is, remember, because Docker Compose is going to have each of these on the same network, right? Like the front end, API, and database are all on the same network. And so if I want to connect from the API to the API from my front end, like think about where that occurs. That occurs in this Streamlit file, right? So if you go to index.py, then I'm gonna, this is my Streamlit app. So it's gonna, make a request to the URL where the URL is API. This is like the key part, right? Is the fact that this is API 5000, and this is where my Flask app is running, and I get to access, it's not localhost, right? It's API. That is like how you refer to the other container, and in that container on port 5000, the Flask app is running, and then we have this route of locations, and then that's why we can like map through them. So this is like the key part. And where does this name come from? It comes from the fact that the service is called API. Okay. So again, just real quickly, here we're making a request to my API service where on port 5000, the Flask app is running. Okay. And then in the API, that's going to make, that's going to call the DB, right? It's like in this container on port 5432, that's where Postgres is running. So if you look at, actually it's not, well, we can start by going there. If you go to this file, you'll see the database URL, and then we, set up, this is just get the database URL from the environment. We'll get there in a second. And then here it's the connection, like we're passing that URL into Postgres. And what is this database URL? That's an environmental variable, and that's coming from here, right here. Database URL, Postgres. Here's my username, here's my password, and then this is the key part right here, the DB. Okay? So we get to, this is not, normally this would be like your local host, but here I don't want to connect to what's on my laptop. I want to connect to what's running inside this container. That's why you say DB. Okay, and then I'm also setting another environmental variable, basically saying when you do Flask run, that will boot up the Flask app. Okay. One other thing, if you look at the back end, this API Docker file, you'll see what's going on, right? This is for my API, so this is my Flask app. So you can say I didn't do this correctly. Like I'm not taking advantage of caching here, but it's okay, I guess. So here we finally install requirements. But this is what I wanted to show you. This host 0. What is this about? This is because by default, when you do like Flask run, Flask will only allow requests from localhost. Okay. So meaning like by default, like only the computer that's serving your API can make requests. But because we're in a because we're in a Docker container, we want to say kind of like outside environments, meaning like my laptop can make a request if I want to inside my container, and Flask won't stop it. So this is saying, okay, any IP address. That's what this flag is saying. Okay, so this is a Flask configuration that basically prevents outside IP address by default from making requests to your Flask app. But here I'm saying, hey, I want my laptop to be able to make a request, even though to inside the container environment. In Flask, please don't stop it. Okay, so that's what's going on here. Then finally, you should be able to do it because now Flask isn't stopping you, and because in the Docker Compose file, you are exposing the port to, you're exposing port 5000 where Flask is running to your laptop. So each one of these things is, I believe, exposing it to your laptop, right? But what allows them to talk to each other on the network is just the fact that we're using Docker Compose, and right. So when we make the request to front end, where's front end? From front end, right? This is this just by default, because they're on the same network, you can make a request between containers. The last thing is the database. Let's go back to my Docker Compose file. So we talked about the front end. Just make sure this makes sense to you. Build context, mapping the ports, don't boot up until the API, bind mount the code, right? So that I can make live updates. And then same thing here. And this just allows me to connect to my Postgres service. So then we get to the database. We set some environmental variables. How do I know about how to, what to do here? Like all these things. It's in the documentation for Postgres. So if you go to the Postgres, like Docker Hub, right, then it tells you, it even kind of gives you, it shows even how to do this with Docker Compose. All right. So here, right, I'm setting my Postgres password. I'm setting my Postgres user. And then here I'm making sure these things line up, right? There's my user and password. Here this is the database that I'm connecting to, right? This after the slash right here. And then things that are interesting is, I guess, the volume, right? This is another bind mount. So basically Postgres is going to save all your data in this folder by default. But here I'm saying really save it in this volume, which we're creating down here. And then this is kind of like probably the most subtle whatever type of thing, is that the image, if you look at this image, the documentation, it says this thing. Initialization scripts. If you would like to do additional initialization in an image, add one or more scripts under docker entry point initdb.d. This is the directory. Even though it looks weird, this is the name of a folder. Okay? And then it says after the image basically calls the initdb, it will run any .sql files and execute any bash scripts found in this directory. Okay? These scripts are only run once when you start the container and it says basically, this is what I want to get to. Any pre-existing database will be left untouched. So this is basically only running the first time. Once we have something in my database and it sees that, it's not going to run anything here again. So what are we doing here? We're saying, hey, this is in my Docker container. There's this folder that exists. I'm going to bind mount anything in this folder, db data. What's in db data? I put a .sql script in there that basically drops my locations, creates it, inserts in some data. So the first time I do Docker Compose up, you can kind of think about what's going to happen. It's going to set this configuration will always be set. It's going to create the volume, say anything I write, any changes I make to the database will be saved in the volume. And the first time I boot up the container, it will run this initialization script, or run the .sql files in this folder, and basically I'm bind mounting what's right here so that this file will be run on initialization. Okay, it's not that bad, I guess. But I just wanted to explain why I'm doing this. So this will create my table, insert in my data. Then when this guy in my API gets hit, it will select all from locations, right, to that database where the database URL is specified here, DB, right? So it will hit this service. And then how does this service get hit? It gets hit from my Streamlit app, which is in for the front end folder somewhere. Here it is. And you can see that here. Okay, so here, when someone visits my website, it will make a request to the API, get back the JSON data, and then iterate through the list of dictionaries and kind of print out each one. So that's what I'm doing there. Anything you want me to kind of revisit or go through with this? All right. Okay, that did not take as long as I thought. So we can talk a little bit about Airflow while I have it booted up. This is gonna be fun. Okay, so let me see. All right, so this is basically, I'm gonna give you this file, okay? But I do want to walk through it with you. You may have to, the lab has one version of it. I updated it and added it to Slack. But either way, we can kind of walk through it. So change it. So you can kind of see it's declaring this airflow common this is basically like, this is kind of like a variable that I think is getting referenced. So I'm able to use this X. Let me see. Actually, maybe not. Damn it. So this airflow common right here. Yeah. Is it used anywhere? Maybe it's because of
you inherit the variables that you declare in anywhere underneath the ampersand.
Yeah, but is it using
inherited anywhere you call it?
Yeah, but is it using this one, or there's not another declared airflow comment somewhere, or is there? That's what I'm wondering.
No, I think after that you reference it with the star, right?
Okay, so that's it. So this is kind of like allowing me to. This is basically saying like this is common configuration that I can like put into different services, and so this will be referenced, and you'll see like different spots. So here I have like the image. This is the image, the default, airflow image name. I changed it to just, in the lab it has you use, I think, 2.01, but I tried to change it to use most recent. Here's the main thing I had to do because I have an M1, so this will depend on your configuration. Because I have a Mac M1, I had to specify that the platform is this Linux x86-64, and that helped fix some stuff. Basically, I was getting an error saying, that the platform this image was incompatible. So I had to add this line here. The other thing I had to do was for Postgres. Originally, it was at 13, and that didn't work. And then secondly, I also had to specify the platform here. In this case, I did AMD 64. Basically, I tried to do the same one here. I tried this same kind of configuration, but it didn't work. And it in the error, it told me to basically try this. So I did. So I'll, like I said, I can kind of like send you all this stuff. It's actually already in Slack if you want. Other things to look at. So there's like a few different main services that are occurring here. Here's the services. Okay, so it's like Postgres. So there's a backend database. You can see that here, this is just using my standard Postgres that we saw in the last lab, right? It's also using the same thing by saving data to a volume. It's doing, I guess, some sort of health check. I'm guessing it's going to restart if it doesn't see this. It's going to try every 5 seconds. Redis, this is typically for probably like queuing. Like if you have different tasks that you need to queue, I'm guessing it's using Redis for that. And again, like here you can map, you can log into Redis if you want another kind of database. This is the web server. So remember like Prefect, like you can kind of log in and see everything. That's this thing. This hopefully I can get to if I go to localhost 8080 and 8080. So that should be eventually okay. Again, you can see it's going to retry every 10 seconds and basically like restart. This command, I'm guessing this is like when it restarts, this is it's going to type web server, which will boot up. This is the command that just Airflow uses to boot up the web server, kind of like our Flask run. And then this is a different service, right, which is the scheduler. Here you can see this Airflow common thing is being referenced. All right. So this, like with Airflow, just like with Prefect, you can say, hey, at this time, I want to run, this task where like in Airflow is called a DAG. And then here's another service called the Celery Worker thing. This was actually hard for me to boot up. But each of these, you can see, are using this Airflow common. Okay? So they're using like the image and then these various kind of configuration components. One other thing I did, I don't love having like a bunch of, Airflow will give you like some pre-existing DAG examples that to me just like kind of crud things up. Or not, it just makes it a little messier. I don't really want to see them. So I just changed it from true to false. So this is Airflow core load examples, right? I changed this to false. Other things are, this is kind of key, in the web server, here I am. So this should be Airflow. So this is the web server service, localhost 8080. How do I know that? If you go to the services, Redis Airflow web server, right? That's what's here. We're mapping the port, and then up here, we're saying the password. Here we go. No, not that one. Here it is. The Airflow username. This is saying either load it from your environment, but if it's not there, then it's like a default. Then the default is Airflow, and the default password is also Airflow. So that's what's going on here. Let me just try to see if I can sign in. And let's look at the questions. Okay, Redis is needed when you're using the Celery executor instead of local executor. Celery allows for multiple executors, so does Redis for the multi-node management. And Kamal's asking about the $. This is right. This is kind of like interpolation essentially. And what this is doing is saying, load this from the environment, load this from like an environmental variable, but the :-airflow is saying if it's not in your environment, like if you did not set an environmental variable with this, then use Airflow. Then the default value is going to be Airflow. Same thing here. So the reason why right now I'm able to log in, so I was able to log, it's now loading, taking forever, but I'm able to log in. I just put in Airflow and Airflow. The reason why that worked is because here there's environmental variables where the value is Airflow and Airflow. Okay? So that my username is Airflow, my password is Airflow. So that's what's going on there. This is YAML. Like, this isn't actually particular to Airflow or to, I don't even think to Docker Compose. This is like YAML, right? So you can kind of, you might see this in other kind of YAML files as well. Okay, one other key thing is this part. I'm bind mount here what's going on is they're bind mounting. So they're bind mounting these 3 folders. So I actually created these 3 folders before class: DAGs, logs, and plugins. And then they're bind mounting inside the container, the web server container, DAGs, logs, and plugins. The documentation tells me to do that, but also, and so does kind of this. But the reason for that is because the way I'm going to like have code, right? Like my logs, I can now see my logs, right? So they're on my computer. So when I shut down Airflow, I still have them, which is nice. And then the DAGs is the main thing. This is the code that's going to allow me to like schedule different tasks. So let's go back. So here we go. So you can see I wrote this DAG called Hello World. Let's take a look at it. So inside, let me just show you. So you can see I have I have this Docker Compose, and then I have these 3 folders: DAGs, logs, and plugins. So I just make directory DAGs, make directory logs, make directory plugins. And that's going to bind mount inside the container. Opt, Airflow, DAGs, logs, plugins. You can, of course, let's just look at it for now. So let's go to cd DAGs. This is what I wrote inside of there. So what do we have? We have a DAG. I forget the word it's called a flow in Prefect, right? So a DAG is the same thing as a flow in Prefect. And our DAG has many tasks. All right, so it's a workflow, essentially. The first task is hello task. And you can see we used this decorator, which comes from Airflow, right, to create a task or to define our tasks. So this is one task. All it does is print out hello world and return hello world. This is another task. All it does is print out by and return it. And then what do? We need to kind of like create each task. So here we're creating a task. There we're creating a task. And then we have to say like the dependency. This part's a little, like just the interface is a little annoying. But what this is saying is this comes first. And then when hello is done running, then by will run. So we define our task, or define, I guess, like the task definition. We create it, assign them to variables, and then we say, first comes my hello task, and then comes my goodbye task, and then finally this DAG, we like create the DAG and assign it. Okay? And we're just saying, I wanted to start yesterday. The reason for doing that is when Airflow sees it should have started yesterday, it will automatically try to catch up, essentially, and so run it once. And you can see I'm just saying run it one time. Actually, I have catch up false here, but I think it will run anyway. And that's kind of it. So what's going to happen here? We declare a DAG, right? And then we have the DAG have these two tasks and have the tasks go in this order. Okay, so this is not what determines the order, but rather this line right here, right? It's the carets. I'm saying before by can start, hello must finish. Okay. Yeah, so it's called a direct, exactly. So DAG is, and the readings go through this, it's called a directed acyclic graph. Okay, what's next? So then you can see I ran this before, but let's just run it again. So we have our DAG. Let's press play. So I can trigger the DAG by hand. You can also kind of say the schedule of running it once, at a specific time. But I'm just going to trigger my DAG. And press play. If I look at okay, and you can see it should, in a second, it will kind of show me the runs. It's being slow because I have Zoom on as well. Oh, other things. Okay, well, I'll get to that in a second. Okay, so you can see it says running. We can click on it now. You can just click on the dot. Okay, these are ones already ran successfully. So this is the one that's currently going on. And you can see also the time. We could have clicked on this too, right? You can see basically that it was 17 seconds ago. So it looks pretty recent. Yeah, normally it shouldn't take you all this long to get to another screen. But one thing you could do, by the way, is because I'm in this, I should be able to see it here. You can kind of see what's going on here, right? And check your web server logs, just like if you want to kind of see the health of it. So you can see the state running. So it looks pretty good. Yeah, and you can see that here too. DAG ID, hello world, state equals running. Oh, that's not exactly what I wanted. Let's click on this run ID. I thought it would take me to a different page. The other thing sometimes I'll do just to check to monitor all these different servers is obviously Docker Compose PS, which will like just show you top level overview of your services to make sure that they're all running. This might be a little, okay, I think we're finally getting there. Yeah, this is what I wanted to show you. Okay, so this graph is pretty useful, right? You can see that the hello task has run, and then will come the bye task. This one was successful. This one hasn't run yet. You can also, you can confirm, I'll sometimes check the code, because if you make updates to the code, you want to make sure that like Airflow has picked up on them. So this is the code that you all saw, right? So Airflow kind of sees that. And then the other thing, I think it's this, is the log. So you can kind of see when it's run, and then you can also read the log messages. It just might feel a little clunky with me because it's taken so long. But
if you tap on the squares, it'll show you the log.
Right. So we can. So you're saying this one is the one that's running. This is the most recent hello task that's running. And then what do I? Oh, I could probably go to here. Logs, maybe.
Yep. It'll show you the whole tree
so this,
for that run.
Right. So this is pretty good. So you can see the return value was hello world. this is what I printed out, okay? So if you look at this, I clicked on this guy right here. So this was successful. Now this one was finally successful. And then you can see the logs for this. So this is just what I printed out here. I said print out hello world. And then it also tells me the return value was hello world. This is useful because if you get error messages, like you're going to want to click on this and check to see what got messed up. So we just basically like clicked on the run. You saw this run. And then from there, you can see the different tasks also and kind of click through and see the logs. You can also then, of course, probably go through your previous runs and click through them too. So the main thing to know about like Airflow, I think, is my main advice that I give people, just like I do for Prefect, is like have these things as small as possible. Like still, try to have as much as possible work without Airflow. Which means what? Like if you have, you can have like your client.py file here and, import requests and, requests.get, right? And make your request, maybe like def call, Foursquare and it hit the API that way, right? And why do I recommend doing this? Because you get, you get to try out this code outside of Airflow. If you ever want to stop using Airflow and move to something else like Prefect or whatever, then all this code will still work, right? You can write tests for all this code to like check it, and you don't have to write. And those tests don't depend on Airflow. And then all you do is over here is do something like from client import import that function call Foursquare, okay, and then call it down here, okay. And then the same thing, like you can have your AWS, like if you want to then write whatever you get to S3, then you should be able to you can use AWS Wrangler and put in your AWS credentials to write the code to S3. So like, as much as possible, I advise you kind of want Airflow just for calling your code. But these things should be as small as possible. Okay. Other things, just to show you, is just some like Docker. Like the Docker Compose stuff is useful for, just remember, for like navigating this. So just remember you have to be, in order to call anything, you have to be able to see your Docker Compose file. Okay. And then I can do Docker Compose PS and just take a look, right? So you can see I've been running this. I just was too afraid to shut it down once I got it working. But this is what I look for, is to see like, are these things all healthy? For me, what was happening, or what I was finding, was this thing right here I wasn't getting healthy. And then because of that, my web server was shutting down. So the web server will kind of keep restarting until it sees this service is healthy. And how do I know that? You can see the logs. All right. So by default, this is showing, once I did Docker Compose up, it's showing me all the logs. But if you want, you can see the logs of just one service. I think just by doing Docker Compose logs, and then let's do, like, probably the most common one you want is this one, the Airflow web server. So you can see it's showing me a bunch of them. But I'm just doing Docker Compose logs and then the name of my service. Okay, so I'm doing Airflow web server. And so this way I can like look through, see if there's errors, right, or what it's telling me. And that's how you can debug. The other thing, so this is, and like if you spend a little, it looks like a mess, but if you spend a little while, you can start to understand it, right? It's like object, here's my grid data, here's my DAG called hello world. Here's, I guess, like when it was run, I'm guessing like this is kind of like the API, how it's doing it somehow. But anyway, you can start to look through that. The other thing that's useful is you can do let's do Docker Compose PS. You see my different services. If I want to go into the web server, so Docker Compose exec -it, the name of the service, Airflow web server, and then bash. I think, yeah. So I'm in the dash opt airflow. I'm in my container, right? Docker compose exec it to continue the name of the service bash. So here, just remember for my Docker compose file that right, I'm bind mounting in opt airflow dags in the folder in my container. I'm bind mounting to these 3 folders. So I just want to confirm that. So there's your dags folder. There's also this airflow config file that's sometimes useful to look at, but you should probably won't have to touch that for now. But here's these dags, and so this folder right here, if you look inside there, that should, right, that's perfectly mapped to whatever's in this folder here, right, because that's bind mounted. Then the other thing you can do, unfortunately for Airflow, or unfortunately for us, with Airflow, just because you have the dags in there, it may take a second. So, I'll show you. If say we update my dags to say, "Hello world, everyone," okay. Now I saved it. If I look at my hello dag.py, it's it's updated immediately, right? Because that's just the way Docker works. It's really just reading from my laptop. But that doesn't mean necessarily my DAG itself has been updated. It can take a little while for Airflow to actually see this change. So what you can do though is you can, and now I'm going to forget how to do it. Hold on. You can go to DAG back. Yeah, you can do this. Python C, import the DAG, so basically what you're doing is you're opening up Python. I hope. I guess there's a reason why I didn't do it this way. So we're going to issue a Python command to basically refresh my DAG bag. This should be faster. So it's like from airflow.models, import the DAG bag, and then just reinitialize it. And this will reread any changes you made here, and make sure Airflow sees it. So this is just it's a useful command, because if you just don't want to have to wait around for Airflow to read the changes you made, that's what I'll often do. And normally it works fine in a second, I guess. It could, again, just be because of my Zoom. Okay, filling up DAG bag from opt airflow dags. Okay, so you can see it's doing that now. So this is just a way to refresh, and the reading takes you through it, and it finally accomplished it. All right. One other thing, just to show you, one reason why my computer is so slow right now is because of this. In order to get Airflow to work, it consumed a good amount of resources for me. So I had to go to settings, I think. Yeah, and then click on resources. This I kept the same at 4 CPUs. The memory I increased. This feels like a lot to me. I don't know if it... And then I had to click on apply and restart. So I'm sure we can Google kind of the recommended memory, or maybe someone knows. But for me, I upgraded this to 6 gigabytes. So basically, your container, Docker's not going to be using more than you allow for here. So I allowed it to use more because it looked like this was continually shutting down because it just did not have enough memory. All right. So that's just another setup thing you may need to do. Again, this feels heavyweight, like it feels more challenging than it should be, and that's just, I didn't build it. So that's why it's like, try to set this up, I guess, but don't get overly bogged down by it. Instead, you can go through the readings. Try to pay attention while you go through the readings and try and understand it. But again, like if you're starting a project from scratch, probably most, you can see some reasons for not using Airflow. It